Ukrainian army has re-entered Russia's border Kursk region and will remain there until the ceasefire is reached, President Volodymyr Zelensky said while addressing journalists on Tuesday. Zelensky revealed that Ukrainian troops withdrew from one area and entered another area in Kursk region, adding that 8 Russian soldiers were taken hostage in Tyatkino in Kursk on May 27. On the same day, Ukrainian air forces struck a Russian army position in Kursk region with F-16 fighter jet and US-made GBU-39 aerial bombs, according reports in Telegram channels. Elsewhere, Zelensky said Russian forces are continuing their offensive operations along the front lines and are currently amassing more than 50,000 troops near Ukraine's Sumy region. Regarding the Sumy front, their strongest and most concentrated forces are currently positioned in the Kursk area. Their goal is to push our troops out of there and prepare for offensive actions in Sumy region, to create what they call a 10 km deep buffer zone inside Ukraine. I believe they understand they lack the capacity to achieve this, the Ukrainian president said. Zelensky noted that Ukrainian forces faced difficulties near Pokrovsk, specifically in the village of Kostantinivka, but reported successful combat in that area. He said that Ukrainian defense forces have pushed the Russians back by 4 kilometers on that section over the past 2 days. Zelensky's comments about Kursk came a month after the Russian Defense Ministry announced that Ukrainian troops were fully withdrawn from Kursk. Kiev had denied Russia's claims back then, claiming that Ukrainian troops were retaining a position in the border region. Last week Vladimir Putin said Russian army forces were creating a security buffer zone along the border with Ukraine. The announcement was made days after Putin's visit to Kursk region.
Russian troops are actively preparing, and in the coming days, most likely, the summer military campaign of the Russian Federation will begin. This opinion was expressed on air by the Reserve Colonel of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, military expert and pilot instructor Roman Svitan on Channel 24. According to him, the Russians are pulling forces and resources from deep rear areas closer to the line of combat in several directions of the front, preparing for an offensive operation. Ukrainian forces are striking important enemy targets in order to prevent the enemy from having such an opportunity. In particular, at the moment, the armed forces of Ukraine are continuing major combat operations on the islands of the left bank in the lower reaches of the Dnieper. The Russians are pushing like crazy there. Now they are trying to prepare at least to force the Dnieper to create certain tactical bridgeheads on the right bank, Svitan said. Enemy movements are recorded from Melitopol towards Tokmak, from Berdyansk through Chernigovka to Pologi towards Gulyaipo. From Mariupol, the enemy is moving towards Velika Novosyolka along the southeastern flank of the Zaporizhia front. So, Russia concentrates its entire army on the front, leaving the depths of the country defenseless. Let us recall that US military intelligence has concluded that Russian President Vladimir Putin has not abandoned his main goals, which he wants to achieve in the war against Ukraine. It is noted that despite significant losses and a protracted war, Putin is not going to stop it. His strategy remains unchanged. Former spokesman for the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Vladislav Zelensky, stated that the main task of the Russian army in the summer of 2025 will be an attempt to capture the Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. According to him, the Russians will launch an offensive from 3 sides at once. In his opinion, during the summer offensive campaign, the Russians will try to use several key factors to their advantage. Firstly, it is the presence of green leaves on the trees, which allows for the covert movement and concentration of large numbers, primarily personnel, who carry out military tasks on adapted vehicles or motorcycles. there are noticeably more foreigners in the Ukrainian army, which indicates an improvement in the recruitment of foreign volunteers. This was reported by a senior lieutenant of the Ukrainian Defense Forces with the call sign Alex, who runs the blog Officer on Telegram. Either they improved the recruitment of foreigners in a certain way or simply introduced other recruitment methods, but I want to admit that there is a certain result. This is an increase in the number of structural units of foreigners in several brigades of the Defense Forces of Ukraine at once. This really cannot but please, but all this should have been done back in 2022, and the effect, frankly speaking, would have been much greater then, he wrote. At the same time, the officer notes that in the context of recruiting foreign volunteers, there is still work to be done. In particular, he believes it is necessary to launch a full-fledged advertising campaign within the limits of what is permitted and create recruiting centers for this. The military man noted that Ukraine should make the path to the army as simple as possible for those foreigners who have expressed a desire to serve in the armed forces of Ukraine. And accordingly, certain social guarantees, benefits on the territory of Ukraine and other payments should be there, because some guys who have been fighting since 2022 still cannot obtain Ukrainian citizenship, although they deserve it much more than the poor guys from Tiza, the officer added. As media wrote, the Ukrainian armed forces include entire units made up of foreign citizens who have expressed a desire to defend Europe from Russian invasion. The most well-known in this context are the Georgian, Belarusian, Chechen and Russian units. But citizens of many other countries are also fighting for Ukraine, not only European ones, but even from the other side of the earth. For example, there are many Colombians defending Ukraine as part of the 2nd International Legion. This was stated by its commander, Major Alexander Yakimovich, in an interview with Hromadski Radio. He explained where these people get their motivation to fight in Ukraine. Yakimovich noted that Latin America is now suffering greatly and suffered before from communism, and it has historically happened that they are fighting it. It is not the same level of struggle, but nevertheless, they suffered greatly from communism throughout their history, because the Soviet Union tried very hard to influence that region to resist the USA. And this, of course, left its mark on history and on the understanding of these people, the military man noted. According to him, in this regard, they understand perfectly well what freedom is and why they are in Ukraine.